The envelope sat on the dining table like a confession waiting to be read. White, clinical. The kind of paper that carries truth whether you're ready for it or not. But before I could even reach for it, before my fingers could trace the seal that held my entire world inside, she laughed. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, standing in my kitchen with her designer handbag and that smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You'll die alone, Margaret," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. Like she was telling me my roses needed water. No grandchildren, no legacy, just you and these empty rooms. The afternoon light came through the window at an angle that made everything look staged. Dust particles floated between us like tiny witnesses. I remember thinking how strange it was that the most devastating moments of your life can happen in the most ordinary settings. I was 62 years old, a widow of 7 years. My son Daniel had been married to Jessica for 5 years, and in all that time, despite their promises, despite the nursery they'd started and abandoned, despite the hope I'd carried like a stone in my chest, there were no grandchildren, and I'd accepted it. I'd made peace with it, or so I thought. "I've seen the way you look at other people's grandkids," Jessica continued, setting her coffee cup down with a soft clink. "It's actually kind of pathetic. Daniel and I have decided we're child-free. We're traveling to Bali next month. You should try getting a hobby instead of waiting by the phone." She didn't know I'd already stopped waiting. Sometimes the truth finds you when you've stopped looking for it. Subscribe to this channel and tell me what city you're listening from right now. The DNA test had arrived 3 weeks earlier, not the one on the table. That one came later. The first one came in an email from a genealogy website I'd joined on a lonely Sunday night. One of those things you do when widowhood makes your house too quiet and your memories too loud. You have a DNA match. Granddaughter. 99.9% probability. I'd stared at those words for 20 minutes straight. Granddaughter. The girl's name was Sophie, 17 years old, living 2 states away with her mother, Claire, a woman I'd never heard of. A woman who, according to the messages we'd exchanged carefully over encrypted emails, had a brief relationship with my son Daniel 18 years ago. Before Jessica. Before the marriage. Before the lie. Claire had never asked for anything. Never demanded child support or recognition. She'd raised Sophie alone, working 2 jobs, keeping the secret because Daniel had begged her to, because he'd been young and scared and had convinced her it was better this way. Better for whom? I'd met Sophie once, in a coffee shop in a town neither of us lived in. She had Daniel's eyes, my late husband's smile. She was studying biology, wanted to be a marine researcher, and when she laughed, it sounded like the grandchild I'd mourned without ever knowing existed. So, yes, I had the test done officially. Legal. Documented. The envelope on my table was the result, and Jessica, standing in my kitchen, had no idea that her cruel words had just armed me with something more powerful than anger. Purpose. "You know what, Jessica?" I said quietly, my hand resting on that envelope. "You're absolutely right. I will die one day. We all will. But alone?" I smiled then, and I watched her expression shift just slightly. "I don't think so." The confusion in her face was almost worth the 7 years of condescension. Almost. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. I just held her gaze until she looked away first. Some truths are best served slowly. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my late husband's study, the one I'd kept exactly as he'd left it, his reading glasses still on the desk, his favorite whiskey bottle collecting dust on the shelf. And I read through every message Claire had sent me. I never wanted to disrupt your family, but Sophie started asking questions, and when she did that DNA test for a school project, I couldn't lie to her anymore. She deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves to know you. The rain started around midnight. The kind of steady downpour that makes the world feel smaller, more intimate. I could hear it drumming against the windows, running through the gutters, washing away the dust of a summer that had felt endless, I thought about Daniel, my son, my only child, the boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them sunshine flowers, the teenager who'd cried in my arms when his father died, the man who'd looked me in the eye 5 years ago and promised me that he and Jessica were trying for a family. Soon, Mom. Soon you'll be a grandmother, I promise. Had he forgotten Sophie? Had he convinced himself she didn't count? Or had he simply chosen the easier narrative, the one where his past didn't inconvenience his present? I'd confronted him, of course. 3 weeks ago, the same night I got Sophie's first message. We'd met at a neutral restaurant, one of those upscale places Jessica loved, where the portions were small and the prices were obscene. He'd arrived late, loosening his tie, checking his phone like it was a lifeline. Mom, what's this about? I have a conference call at 8. I'd slid my phone across the table. Sophie's photo on the screen. The color drained from his face faster than water through a sieve. How did you... She took a DNA test. It matched with mine. My voice was steady, but my hands were not. 18 years, Daniel. You have a daughter who's 18 years old and you never told me. The waiter came by. Daniel ordered scotch. I ordered nothing. It's complicated, he'd said finally, and I almost laughed. Complicated, I repeated. You let me believe I'd never have grandchildren. You let Jessica say cruel things to me about being alone. You watched me grieve something you knew I actually had. She was a mistake, Mom. Those 4 words. She was a mistake. Not the situation. Not the timing. Not the relationship. She, Sophie, my granddaughter, a mistake. I'd stood up then, left money on the table for a meal I'd never ordered, walked out while he called after me, his voice fading into the ambient noise of clinking silverware and hushed conversations. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, he'd called 14 times. I'd answered none of them. Jessica had called twice. I'd blocked her after the second. Because here's what I'd learned in 62 years of living. Some people don't deserve your explanations. Some people deserve your silence and your distance, and the slow-building weight of consequences they never saw coming. The rain continued. The study smelled like old books and memories. And somewhere 2 states away, a 17-year-old girl who shared my blood was probably lying awake too, wondering if her grandmother would truly accept her. I picked up my phone and typed, Sophie, I'd love for you to visit next weekend, if you're ready. Her reply came in seconds. I've been ready my whole life. Sophie arrived on a Saturday morning when the world still smelled like coffee and possibility. I'd cleaned the house 3 times, changed my outfit 4, baked cookies I wasn't sure she'd even like. I'd become the nervous version of myself I thought I'd outgrown decades ago. When the doorbell rang, my heart did something complicated. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 silhouettes, Sophie and Claire. I opened the door, and for a moment, we all just stood there, 3 women connected by one man's choices, by biology and silence and years of parallel lives that never touched. Until now. Sophie was taller than I'd expected. She wore jeans and a faded band t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Daniel's eyes, yes, but something else too. Something fiercer. Something that looked like survival. Hi, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. I'm Sophie. I know, I whispered. Come in. Please. Claire hung back, uncertain. She was younger than I'd imagined, early 40s, with tired eyes and hands that looked like they'd worked hard for everything. No wedding ring, no pretense. I can wait in the car, she offered. Absolutely not, I said firmly. You raised her. You kept her safe. You're part of this story, too. We sat in the living room, the same room where I'd hosted Daniel's graduation party, his wedding reception, countless Christmas dinners with Jessica's fake smile stretched across the table. But this felt different. This felt real. Sophie told me about school, about her dreams of studying marine biology, about the first time she'd gone snorkeling and felt like she'd found where she belonged. She told me about growing up with questions she'd learned not to ask, about the day she got her DNA results and realized her father wasn't just absent. He was actively hiding. "I don't want to disrupt his life," Sophie said quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea I'd made too strong. "I just wanted to know where I came from, who I came from." "You're not disrupting anything," I said, and I meant it. "He disrupted this, not you, never you." Claire spoke then, her voice soft but steady. "I never wanted money or acknowledgement. Daniel made it clear from the beginning that he couldn't be involved, and I accepted that. I thought it was better for Sophie to have stability, even if it meant growing up without a father figure. But when she found out..." Her voice caught. She had every right to know her family. I looked at this woman, this stranger who'd carried my granddaughter, raised her, loved her alone, and I felt something crack open inside me. Gratitude, grief, rage at my son for making her do it alone. "Thank you," I said, "for protecting her, for being everything she needed when her father couldn't be." Claire's eyes filled with tears. Sophie reached across and took my hand. And in that moment, sitting in my living room, while the morning light painted everything gold, I realized something Jessica would never understand. Family isn't just blood. It's not just biology or legal documents or matching last names. Family is showing up. Family is the people who choose each other when the world says they don't have to. Family is a 17-year-old girl driving 2 states to meet a grandmother who'd been lied to for 18 years, and choosing connection anyway. I squeezed Sophie's hand back. "You're staying for dinner," I announced, "and breakfast, and as long as you want." Sophie smiled, that smile that looked like hope wearing my late husband's face. "I'd like that," she said. For 2 weeks, I said nothing. Daniel called. I didn't answer. Jessica texted, "Daniel says you're being dramatic. Whatever this is, can we please just move past it?" I deleted the message without responding, because here's what I'd learned. Silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Sophie came to visit 3 more times. Each visit, she stayed longer. Each visit, she brought pieces of herself I'd been robbed of witnessing. Childhood photos, school awards, a worn copy of her favorite book. We cooked together. We talked about her grandfather, my late husband, the man she'd never meet, but whose DNA she carried like an inheritance of curiosity and kindness. Claire came too, initially hesitant, eventually relaxed. We became something unexpected. Allies. Friends. 2 women who'd loved the same flawed man in different ways and had paid different prices for it. I started building the case quietly. The DNA test, properly documented, printed emails, bank statements showing I'd started a college fund for Sophie the day after we first met, photos of us together, proof that this wasn't just biology, this was relationship. Because I knew what was coming. I knew Daniel. He'd been raised to avoid conflict, to smooth things over, to pretend problems would disappear if ignored long enough. But I'd also raised him to understand consequences, even if he'd forgotten that lesson somewhere between youth and entitlement. And Jessica? Jessica was about to learn that cruelty has a price. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at the grocery store, the mundane kind of errand that feels like meditation when I saw her. Jessica, standing in the wine aisle with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying across the store with that particular carelessness of someone who's never had to watch their words. "I don't know what's gotten into her," she was saying. "She's being completely unreasonable. Daniel's stressed out, and honestly, his mother is acting like a child. Maybe it's dementia or something." I stood frozen between the pasta and the canned goods. "Anyway, we're thinking of limiting contact. She's becoming too difficult. And Daniel doesn't need the drama right now with the promotion coming up. Dementia. Too difficult. Limiting contact." I'd been called many things in my life. I'd been called too emotional after my husband died, too involved when Daniel was growing up, too hopeful when they'd promised me grandchildren. But I'd never been called irrelevant. I'd never been erased while still standing. I put my groceries back, every single item, with the careful precision of someone making a decision. Then I walked out of that store and drove straight to a lawyer's office. Not to sue, not to demand anything, but to protect what mattered, to establish grandparents' rights, to legally document my relationship with Sophie, to make sure that whatever Daniel and Jessica decided, they couldn't take away what I'd found. They couldn't unmeet us. They couldn't undo love. The lawyer, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and expensive glasses, listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Chen," she said quietly, "you have more than a case here. You have a moral imperative." I signed the papers that afternoon, and then I went home and did something I hadn't done in years. I called my son. He answered on the second ring, his voice tense. "Mom, we need to talk," I said. "All of us. This Sunday, my house, noon." "About what?" I looked at the framed photo on my desk. Sophie laughing, Claire beside her, both of them looking at me like I was something precious. "About family," I said. "The real kind." They arrived separately, which told me everything. Daniel came first, his car pulling into the driveway at 11:45, early in the way of people bracing for confrontation. He sat in the driver's seat for a full 3 minutes before getting out, checking his phone, delaying the inevitable. Through the window, I watched him walk up the path. He'd aged since I'd last really looked at him. Lines around his eyes, gray threading through his hair. He looked like his father, but without the warmth that had made his father remarkable. When had that happened? When had my son become someone I had to strategize against? Jessica arrived at exactly noon, her timing as precise as her judgment. She wore white, an interesting choice for someone about to face consequences. Her heels clicked against the walkway like a countdown. They stood on my porch together, a united front, and for just a moment I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said. No hug, no small talk, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was, a reckoning. We sat in the dining room, the same table where Jessica had laughed and told me I'd die alone. The same table where that first DNA envelope had sat like a loaded gun. But today there were different papers spread across the surface. Legal documents, printed emails, photos of Sophie and me, at the park, baking cookies, sitting on the porch at sunset, evidence of relationship, proof of love, and in the center of it all, the official DNA test. Granddaughter. 99.9% probability. Jessica saw it first. I watched her face shift from confusion to recognition to something like fear. "What is this?" she whispered. Daniel had gone pale. "This," I said calmly, "is Sophie. Your husband's daughter. My granddaughter. The child you said didn't exist while you told me I'd die alone." The silence was so complete, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. "Mom," Daniel started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished." My voice didn't shake. "For 18 years, you hid her. For 5 years of your marriage, you let Jessica believe you were childless, while a beautiful, brilliant girl grew up 2 states away, wondering why her father didn't want her. And for the last 7 years since your father died, you let me grieve the grandchildren I thought I'd never have, while she existed." Jessica turned to Daniel, her face a mask of betrayal. "You have a daughter?" "It was before us," he said quickly. "It was handled." "She was handled," I interrupted, my voice sharp now. "She's not a problem to be managed, Daniel. She's your child." "You don't understand," he said desperately. "I was 22. Claire and I were barely together. I couldn't—" "You couldn't what? Support her? Acknowledge her? Tell your own mother?" I made a choice. You made a coward's choice." The words hung in the air like smoke. If you've ever had to choose between peace and truth, you know this feeling. Subscribe if you're still with me, and tell me, what would you do? Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I can't believe you kept this from me." "Jess, please, don't." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than condescension in her eyes. Something almost like understanding. "You have a granddaughter." "Yes." "And you've been meeting with her." "Yes." She grabbed her purse. "I need air." And just like that, she walked out. Daniel didn't follow her. He just sat there, staring at the photos of Sophie like they were evidence of a crime. In a way, I suppose they were. Evidence of absence, of abandonment, of choices that had consequences he'd never had to face. Until now. "She looks like Dad," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "She has your eyes, his smile. My stubbornness, apparently." I sat down across from him. "Daniel, she's wonderful. She's smart and kind, and she's spent 18 years wondering if she was wanted. I was young. You're 40 now. You've had 18 years to reconsider, to reach out, to at least tell me." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd break something and hope confession would soften the punishment. Claire and I agreed it was better this way. Better for whom? He couldn't answer that. I pushed a folder across the table. "These are the documents establishing my relationship with Sophie. Grandparent rights, college fund, emergency contact authorization from Claire. You're legally claiming her. I'm legally protecting her. And protecting my right to have her in my life. Because I don't trust you not to ask me to disappear from her world once this becomes inconvenient for you. I would never. You already did." I stood up. "You erased her for 18 years. You let Jessica mock me for being childless. You chose comfort over truth, and now you're losing both." He left 20 minutes later, his shoulders hunched in a way that made him look like the boy he'd been instead of the man he'd become. I watched his car disappear down the street, and I felt something complicated. Not quite victory, not quite grief. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's what justice feels like when it involves people you love. The house was quiet again. The papers were still spread across the table. The photos of Sophie smiled up at me, frozen moments of joy we'd created in the margins of Daniel's denial. I thought about calling her, but it was the middle of her school day. So instead, I made tea and sat on the back porch, watching the neighbor's cat hunt invisible prey through the garden. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Jessica. Can we talk? Alone?" I stared at that message for a long time. The woman who'd stood in my kitchen and laughed while telling me I'd die alone was now asking for conversation. For what? Apology? Explanation? Alliance? I typed back, "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my house." Her response was immediate. "Thank you." What do you say to someone who's been cruel when they discover they were cruel based on lies? What do you say to someone who suddenly realized their entire marriage might be built on foundation of omission? I didn't know yet. But I'd find out tomorrow. I finished my tea as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, the same colors that had been in the room when Jessica first laughed at me. Funny how light can mean such different things depending on what it's illuminating. That night, I dreamed of my husband. He was sitting in his study, reading glasses perched on his nose, and he looked up at me with that gentle smile. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "Am I?" I asked. "It feels like I'm destroying our son." "You're not destroying him. You're holding him accountable. That's love too." I woke up to my phone ringing. "Sophie." "Grandma?" Her voice was thick with tears. "Dad called me." My heart stopped. "What did he say?" "He wants to meet." Jessica arrived at exactly 2 p.m., punctual as always. But everything else about her was different. No designer handbag, no perfect makeup, no armor of expensive clothes and carefully constructed superiority. She wore jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back messily. She looked, for the first time since I'd known her, like a real person instead of a performance. I led her to the living room, offered tea. She accepted with hands that trembled slightly. We sat in silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that precedes confession. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About Sophie. Daniel never told me." "I believe you." She looked up, surprised. "You do? Your shock was genuine. Your anger at him was real. Whatever else you've been, you're not that good of an actress." Something like relief crossed her face, followed quickly by something darker. "Shame, maybe. I was cruel to you," she said. "That day in your kitchen, and before that. For years I've been—" She struggled for the word. "Dismissive, cold. I treated you like an obligation instead of a person." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." She flinched but didn't argue. "I thought I was protecting my marriage," she continued. "Daniel always talked about his mother as this needy, emotional woman who couldn't let go. He painted you as difficult, demanding. And I believed him because it was easier than questioning whether he might be lying. And now? Now I'm realizing my husband is capable of hiding a whole child for 18 years. Her voice cracked. What else has he lied about? What else don't I know? I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to enjoy her pain, just a little, after years of her casual cruelty. But I didn't, because I recognized the look in her eyes. I'd seen it in my own mirror after my husband died, and I'd discovered the credit card debt he'd hidden, the small betrayals that crack the foundation of everything you thought you knew. I don't know what else he's lied about, I said honestly. But I know my son, and I know he's excellent at convincing himself that omission isn't the same as deception. He learned that somewhere. The implication hung between us. Did he learn it from me? From his father? From some combination of family patterns neither of us could see clearly? Maybe, I acknowledged. But he's 40 years old. At some point, we have to own our own choices. Jessica nodded slowly. I told him I want a separation. I hadn't expected that. That's a big step. I can't trust him. She looked at me directly. And I can't be married to someone who could abandon his own child. What does that say about who he is? What does that say about me for choosing him? It says you didn't have all the information. Does that excuse it? No, I said gently. But it explains it. We sat there, two women who'd been positioned as opponents, slowly realizing we'd both been playing roles in a story written by a man who'd never been honest with either of us. I want to meet her, Jessica said suddenly. Sophie. If she's willing. If you think it's appropriate. Why? Because she's real. Because she matters. Because maybe... Jessica's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because maybe understanding who he threw away will help me understand what I'm walking away from. I considered this. I'll ask her, I said. But Jessica? If you meet her as a person, not as evidence in your divorce. She's not a weapon. She's a kid who's been hurt enough. I understand. After Block 7, I want to remind you, healing isn't linear, and neither is this story. If you're invested, hit subscribe and drop a comment. I read them all. The meeting happened on neutral ground, a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. Sophie arrived first, with Claire as backup. She wore her nervousness like an ill-fitting coat, her hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate she wasn't drinking. You don't have to do this, I reminded her quietly. I know. She looked at me with those eyes that were so much like Daniel's but braver somehow. But I want to. She's part of the story now too. Jessica walked in 10 minutes later. She spotted us immediately and hesitated, just for a moment, before walking over. Hi, she said softly. I'm Jessica. Sophie. My granddaughter didn't stand. didn't offer her hand, just acknowledged the introduction with a nod. Jessica sat down across from her, and I watched these two women, separated by a generation, connected by one man's failure, size each other up. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Jessica started. "I know this is weird." "Yeah, it is. I didn't know about you until last week." "I know." Sophie's voice was neutral, giving away nothing. "Grandma told me." Jessica glanced at me, something complicated passing across her face when Sophie said, "Grandma," so naturally, claiming a relationship Jessica had mocked me for not having. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, "for what my husband, for what Daniel did, for what he didn't do, for 18 years of absence." Sophie studied her for a long moment. "You're apologizing for him?" "No. I'm apologizing for being married to him and not knowing. For being part of a life he built on lies. That's not your fault. Isn't it? I helped him maintain the fiction. I told your grandmother she'd die alone without grandchildren. I was cruel because I didn't know, but not knowing doesn't erase the cruelty. This was not the Jessica I knew. This was someone cracked open, raw, forced to examine herself in ways comfortable people rarely do." Sophie took a sip of her hot chocolate. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Jessica said. "I don't want anything. I just wanted to meet you, to see the person Daniel threw away, to understand what kind of man I married. And you're nothing like what I imagined. You're real and whole, and you don't need him." Jessica's voice caught. "You never needed him. That's what kills me. He wasn't missing from your life. He was missing from his own." Claire spoke for the first time. "He made his choice 18 years ago." "I know." Jessica looked at Claire now. "You raised her alone?" "Yes." "That must have been hard." "It was." Claire's voice was firm. "But it was also honest. We didn't have much, but we had truth, and we had each other." "I've had everything," Jessica said quietly. "And I'm not sure I've had anything real." The cafe hummed around us. Other conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, the gentle acoustic music playing overhead. Normal life continuing while 4 women sat at a table rearranging the architecture of a family. "I'm leaving him," Jessica said suddenly, looking at Sophie. "I wanted you to know that. Not because of you, because of him, because of what he's capable of hiding." Sophie nodded slowly. "Okay. Does that matter to you, that I'm leaving? Honestly?" Sophie met her eyes. "Not really. You're not my family. He's not my family. They are." She gestured to Claire and me. "They're the ones who showed up." Jessica absorbed this like a blow, but she didn't flinch away from it. "You're right," she said. "Showing up matters. Daniel wanted to meet Sophie at his house. I said no. He suggested a restaurant he liked. I said no. He asked where then, and I told him, wherever Sophie wants. This isn't about your comfort." Sophie chose the park near my house, the one where we'd walked together on her first visit, where she'd told me about her love of marine biology, and I'd told her about her grandfather's love of the ocean. Neutral ground that was already hers. Daniel arrived 15 minutes late, which was either nerves or habit. He wore a business casual outfit, like this was a client meeting he could impress his way through. Sophie sat on a bench in jeans and her favorite hoodie, looking younger than her 17 years, but somehow more mature than my 40-year-old son. I stayed close but not intrusive, sitting at a different bench within eyesight. Claire was in the car in the parking lot, ready to intervene if needed. We'd become a tactical team, Sophie's protective detail. "Hi," Daniel said, his voice uncertain. "Hi." Sophie didn't stand up, didn't invite him to sit. He sat anyway, keeping distance between them. I watched from my bench, pretending to read a book, every cell of my body attuned to their interaction. "You look like my dad," Daniel said. "Your grandfather. He would have loved you." "Would he?" Sophie's voice was cool. Or would he have been disappointed in you for hiding me? Direct hit. Daniel recoiled. That's fair, he managed. Is it? Because nothing about this situation is fair. You gotta hide me. I got to not exist. Mom got to struggle alone. Your wife got to mock Grandma for not having grandchildren. Where's the fair part? I was young. Stop. Sophie held up her hand. Everyone keeps saying that like it explains everything. You were young once. But you've been an adult for 18 years. You had 18 years to reconsider. To reach out. To at least tell your mother she had a granddaughter. It got complicated. I got complicated. Say it right. I wasn't a situation or a circumstance. I was a kid. I am a person. And you erased me because I was inconvenient. I wanted to cheer. I wanted to hug her. I wanted Daniel to feel every single word like the judgment it was. You're right, he said finally, and something in his voice cracked. You're absolutely right. There's no excuse. I was selfish and scared, and I convinced myself I was protecting everyone when really I was just protecting myself. From what? From having to be responsible. From having to grow up in the ways that actually matter. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. From having to be the kind of man my father was. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Tell me about him. Your dad. My grandfather. And there, on a park bench in the late afternoon sun, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He told the truth. He talked about his father, my husband, with honesty instead of nostalgia. He talked about being terrified of failing the way he'd watched his father struggle sometimes. About being 22 and panicking when Claire got pregnant. About convincing himself that absence was better than inadequate presence. He wouldn't have agreed with that, Sophie said quietly. No, Daniel admitted. He would have told me that showing up scared is still showing up. So why didn't you? He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but it was too pathetic to say out loud. Because no one made me. Because I could get away with it. Because Claire let me go and I let myself believe that was permission. I can't give you back 18 years, Daniel said. I can't undo the damage. But I want to try. If you'll let me. Not as your father. I don't deserve that title. But as someone who wants to do better. Who wants to know you. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. I don't need you, she said finally. I need you to understand that. I have a mom who's been everything. I have a grandmother now who actually shows up. I have a life that works without you in it. I know. But, she continued, and I saw Daniel's breath catch on hope. I'm willing to let you try. Not for you. For me. So I can say I gave you the chance you never gave yourself. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder and more honest than that. It was conditional grace. They talked for another hour. I watched the light change, watched their body language shift incrementally. Not toward warmth, but toward something less hostile. Détente, maybe. When Sophie finally stood up, Daniel stood too. Can I hug you? He asked. She considered this. Not yet. He nodded, accepting the boundary. As Sophie walked toward me, Daniel called out, Sophie? She turned. Thank you, he said, for being braver than I ever was. She didn't respond, just continued walking. But I saw something shift in her expression. Not softness, exactly. But maybe the beginning of understanding that hurt people, and sometimes they're hurting themselves most of all. We walked to the car where Claire was waiting. Sophie was quiet, processing. You okay? I asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me tomorrow. That night, after they'd driven home, after I'd heated up leftover soup for dinner and pretended to watch television, my phone rang. Daniel. I almost didn't answer, but something, maternal instinct or curiosity, or the exhaustion of avoidance, made me pick up. Mom. Daniel. Silence. Then, I'm sorry. For all of it. For lying to you. For making you believe you'd never have grandchildren. For letting Jessica be cruel when I could have stopped it with the truth. Okay. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say? That I forgive you? I'm not there yet. That I understand. I don't. You didn't just lie, Daniel. You let me grieve something I actually had. Do you know how that feels? His voice was thick. I'm getting a divorce. I know, Jessica told me. She told you? We've been talking. Turns out we have more in common than we thought. We were both living with your lies. He was crying now. I could hear it in his breathing. I've ruined everything. No, I said, and I meant it. You've hurt people. You've made terrible choices. But you haven't ruined everything. Sophie exists. She's brilliant and strong, and she doesn't need you. But she's willing to know you. That's more grace than you deserve. I know. So don't waste it. Show up. Be honest. Do the work. And maybe, years from now, you'll have earned back some of what you threw away. What about us? You and me? I looked around my house. At the photos of Sophie I'd already framed and hung. At the life I was building that included her and Claire, and even, surprisingly, Jessica in some complicated way. We'll see, I said. I'm not cutting you out. But you're not automatically back in either. You're on probation, Daniel. With your daughter, with your ex-wife, with me. Prove you've changed, don't just say it. I will, I promise. We'll see, I repeated. Good night, son. I hung up before he could respond. Sophie's 18th birthday fell on a Saturday in March, when spring was just starting to remember itself. We celebrated at my house, the house that had once felt too big and too empty, and now felt exactly right. Claire brought a homemade cake. Jessica brought flowers and a college survival kit, because Sophie had been accepted to the marine biology program at a prestigious university on the coast. I'd contributed to her college fund every month since we'd met, and Claire had finally, reluctantly, gratefully, accepted help with tuition. She's your granddaughter, Claire had said when I'd insisted. Let her grandfather's savings do what he would have wanted. We hung streamers in the living room. We ordered too much Thai food. We played music that Sophie loved and I pretended to understand. And when Daniel's car pulled into the driveway, Sophie made a decision. He can stay, she said. It's okay. He'd been showing up. Not perfectly. Not without stumbles. But consistently. He'd been in therapy. He'd signed the divorce papers. He'd sent Sophie texts that started awkward and slowly became more natural. Not trying to be a father, just trying to be present. He brought a gift, a vintage dive watch that had belonged to his father. My husband. Grandpa wore this on every ocean trip, Daniel said, his voice careful. I thought, if you're going to study the ocean, maybe you should have a piece of him with you. Sophie held the watch like it was made of hope and history. Thank you, she whispered. It was the first time she'd hugged him back. As the evening stretched into night, I found myself in the kitchen with Jessica, washing dishes while laughter drifted in from the living room, where Sophie, Claire, and Daniel were attempting to play a board game none of them knew the rules to. This is weird, right? Jessica said, handing me a plate to dry. That we're here, together, that this is my life now. Weird, I agreed, but not bad. Not bad, she echoed. I have a question. Okay. That day in your kitchen, when you had the DNA test on the table and I said you'd die alone, did you know? In that moment, did you know you were about to destroy everything? I thought about that afternoon. The envelope, the laugh, the way everything had pivoted on her cruelty and my silence. I knew I had a choice, I said slowly. I could have hidden it to keep the peace. I could have confronted Daniel privately and let him control the narrative. But yes, I knew that putting truth on the table would break things. Why did you do it? Because some things need to break before they can be honest. and because I was tired of being the one who stayed quiet to make everyone else comfortable. Jessica nodded. I'm glad you didn't. Stay quiet, I mean. I'm glad you blew it all up. Even though your marriage ended. My marriage was built on lies. It needed to end. She looked toward the living room where Daniel was laughing at something Sophie said. Maybe now he can actually become the person he was supposed to be. Maybe, I said. But that's his work, not ours. What's our work? I smiled. This, showing up, building something new from the rubble of what was broken. The front door opened, more guests arriving. Sophie's friends from school, Claire's sister who'd driven 3 hours to be here. The house filled with voices and laughter, and the beautiful chaos of people who'd chosen each other. Jessica looked around, wonder in her voice. You didn't die alone. No, I said. I didn't. Later, after the cake was eaten and the presents were opened and most of the guests had left, I found Sophie on the back porch. She was wearing her new dive watch, staring up at stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Good birthday? I asked, sitting beside her. The best, she said. Thank you, for all of it, for choosing me. Sweetheart, there was no choice. You're my granddaughter, your family. But you didn't have to fight for me. You could have let Daniel keep his secret. You could have kept your life simple. Simple isn't always better. True is better. Real is better. I took her hand. You know what your grandfather used to say? What? That family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who shares your burdens, who shows up on the hard days, who tells you the truth even when it costs them. Is that why you and Jessica are friends now? Because she showed up? Yeah, and because we both loved flawed men and paid different prices for it. That kind of understanding builds bridges. Sophie was quiet for a moment. I'm nervous. About college. About leaving. That's normal. What if I'm not ready? You're ready, I said firmly. You've been ready your whole life. You've been navigating hard things since before you should have had to. College will be easy compared to what you've already survived. She leaned her head on my shoulder. Will you visit? Try to stop me. I'll be the grandmother in the campus sweatshirt embarrassing you at every opportunity. She laughed. Good. We sat there as the stars multiplied overhead, as the night settled around us like a blanket, as the sounds of people cleaning up inside created a soundtrack of normalcy and love. Grandma? Yeah? Thank you for proving her wrong. Who? Jessica. That day she said you'd die alone. Thank you for proving that wasn't true. For building this. She gestured toward the house, toward the life we'd created in the aftermath of Revelation. I didn't build it alone, I said. We built it, all of us. Even the broken parts of us. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Thank you for today. For everything. Sophie is so lucky to have you. I typed back. We're all lucky to have each other. And I meant it. Because here's what I'd learned in the 6 months since a DNA test had sat on my dining table and changed everything. Family is a choice you make every day. Truth is painful, but necessary. And sometimes the family you're born into has to break apart, so the family you choose can come together. I didn't die alone. I lived surrounded by people who'd chosen me back, and that made all the difference. This is where our story ends, but maybe yours is just beginning. Subscribe to this channel, tell me what city you're listening from, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the truth really does set you free. The laugh that should have destroyed me became the moment that saved me. Not because revenge is sweet, but because truth, no matter how painful, is always better than comfortable lies. Jessica was wrong. I didn't die alone. I learned to live surrounded by love I didn't know I had. And that's the best plot twist of all.